All right. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
We're entering into day 19 of this war with Iran. And how's it going so far for Trump and Israel?
Um, well, they're still pounding Iran, but Iran is continuing to, you know, shut down the Strait of Hormuz. They're letting through friendly tankers, and yeah, so it continues pretty much. I think it's fair to say that we're on the same trajectory. It should be pointed out that it looks like at least, yeah, since we last talked. We learned that Ali Larijani, who was, the head of security in Iran, and many people said the de facto ruler of Iran, was assassinated. The head of, and a couple other leaders have too. We'll just say in the last couple of days. So the Israelis continue to assassinate Iranian rulers. It was known that actually Larijani was considered a pragmatist and somebody that was more willing to deal with the West than a lot of the other leadership. So, the question arises again, why are you killing these people who maybe you could talk to? If you really are after regime change, you need to talk to somebody at some point, right? But I don't think the Israelis are after regime change. Actually, the U.S. and Israel are in some ways at cross purposes here. Again, Israel wants to see a large Syria, a Libya, something like that take place, develop in Iran. It's what it's called mowing the lawn. I think that's their idea. It's just to weaken the opponent, to keep the opponent always on the back foot. That was a phrase actually that was used by in an opinion piece in Haaretz. That's what the analyst said that Israel is doing. Essentially, they're mowing the lawn. They're just trying to weaken this country with a plan to go back and weaken it again, to keep it eternally weak, permanently weak. The U.S., on the other hand, well, I think it's Trump. He wants some kind of glorious victory. He wants to be able to say, mission accomplished, and maybe grab the nuclear material or something. Who knows what he wants, but he just wants something specific. I don't think he's really. He would be satisfied with the Israeli goal. I mean, at least I don't believe so. I mean, he wants something more concrete. Whether it's regime change or the seizure of the enriched uranium or whatever it might be. Now, another thing that's happening that again indicates that they may be at cross purposes is that. Well, earlier, you remember the oil refinery right outside of Tehran was struck. And that was the first time when the U.S. openly criticized Israel. They didn't want him to do that. Again, Trump is very, very sensitive to oil prices, and I think that's part of it. And also said, well, if we would take this country, we want to have an oil infrastructure. We want to do a Venezuela. Maybe he's got that. I think he does have that idea in his mind. And that's why he's thinking about Karg Island, too. Just recently, the Israelis struck some oil facilities. Actually, it was a gas field, the South Pars gas field, which is a huge gas field in western Iran, and did some significant damage to that. And immediately, in response, oil prices spiked. I just checked, it's about 109 now, whereas before it was about 102 just a few hours earlier, and it's still going up. Again, I don't think the Americans want that. We're trying to figure out why the U.S. were letting this, certain tankers through, letting the Iranians pick the ones the tankers that they would allow through the Strait of Hormuz. And then the Americans were not harassing those tankers, even when they were clearly Iranian linked. They had oil from Karg Island or wherever. We thought, maybe China has a role in this, and that may be true. But another thing is that, again, it's just sensitivity to oil prices. It's just like, and that's why we're removing sanctions on the Russians. They're reversing course on all these things because they're so desperate to keep oil prices down. Trump understands that could be fatal for him, and for the Republicans. So anyway, that's, this is a potential fissure, we could say, that is developing between the Israelis and the Americans.
Do you think that fissure can really widen and that the U.S. will actually have the gumption to say no more? It's insane. If they're acting contrary to our interests, they start this war and we can't tell them to stop blowing up this oil infrastructure, energy infrastructure that is wrecking the whole global economy. I mean, we're going down. I mean, it's just I can't believe we were so tied to Israel that we can't stop. Like this killing of Larijani, is that something that the United States approves of? That we're like, okay, do we say anything about it? I mean,
yeah, and I haven't heard any comments. I haven't heard them criticize Israel over that, and maybe they don't care. But I'm wondering if, in fact, you really are looking for regime change. Well, maybe they decide Larijani's not the guy. They got someone farther down the line. I don't know. But it seems more likely that as, you knock off the people at the top, you're going to get younger people who have seen, these assassinations, who have lost family members, like the current supreme leader. And they're going to be even more hardline.
Right. But we understand that, right? It's not a difficult thing to understand that this is how it would rally people around the flag when you start assassinating the leadership. This doesn't typically work. So why are we pursuing this policy?
Sometimes you just do something because you can. I've heard it described as a smart bomb trap. This is an ability that governments have now. With smart bombs, you can target individuals. It wasn't possible in the past. It was really hard to, if you wanted to go after Hitler or the Germans go after Churchill, it was not that they actually, either side did try to do that, but if they did, it would have been extremely difficult. Just bombs were dumb then. They would land off in a good mile away from the intended target. But now you can, if you know a location of somebody, you can strike that person, with great accuracy. That's the kinds of weapons that are out there. And it gives, I've heard this argument, I think there's a lot of truth to it. It gives governments a false sense of power. This is something that we can do. Now, no, obviously not every government does that. Let's go back to Russia. Obviously, Russia has this ability, has very, very precise weapons and lots of them, and it hasn't. And you've even heard criticism within Russia, say, why don't we try to decapitate the Ukrainian leadership? But the Russians have not done that. I actually hope that they won't. I hope that they don't go down that road. But the U.S. and Israel clearly does. They don't feel any kind of, let's say, qualms about this. But does it do any good? I mean, in some cases, when you're talking about certain kinds of countries that have, where the power structure, it really is dependent on one individual. I think that was to a great extent true of Saddam Hussein's Iraq. It was to some extent true, I think, also in Syria, Assad's Syria. But it's clearly not true in Iran, where you have a constitutional republic, a well-developed system with, many interconnected institutions. It doesn't work. It just doesn't. And so you just wonder, well, why do they do this? Again, I'll go to this when it's maybe they enjoy it. It's just like it gives Netanyahu and those people they like killing the others, their counterparts in these other countries. Maybe sometimes, look at Hezbollah. I think they actually thought that by killing Nasrallah and many other leaders, remember, they really just completely decapitated the leadership of Hezbollah. Clearly, there was a serious security breach there. They probably had moles deep in the system, and they just got them all, right? And they had a sense that, okay, yeah, we've greatly weakened Hezbollah. And I think, Hezbollah has been weakened to some extent, but it's clear that, no, they're back and they're fighting and they're organized and they're unified. And that's what the Israelis are finding to their dismay. That again is what the Israelis themselves are supporting. Oh, Hezbollah is a lot stronger than we thought. So this killing of leaders, it may have a temporary effect in certain countries, certain political systems. It might actually work. It might actually cause chaos. It's not working, and I don't see that it will work in Iran. Iran said that ahead of time. They were prepared for this. They had lined up, 4 or 5 different people, for each of these positions, knowing that this was going to happen. But again, it's like, yeah, you have this ability and you're running out of targets. You just keep on doing it. That's the way military bureaucracies work.
But do you think if we continue doing this, that there's a chance that it'll succeed, or will it continue to actually have the opposite effect, that it will continue to rally people around the flag? And because this is something I think, I don't know if the U.S. doesn't understand, but just this concept of martyrdom as well in Islam, I think it's a very, very powerful force. And you see it when Larijani just got killed in, or what, Khamenei, any of those leaders, they have these massive funerals and people come out and just support. They don't hide it. Whereas in some where we see with Israel, I'm pretty sure Netanyahu's dead. It's really weird. Okay. Like these videos are just getting stranger and stranger. And they won't have this. I don't know if in Israel, I guess they don't have this concept of martyrdom. So he's dead. I feel like they're trying to hide it. We got to hide it. Whereas in here in Iran, you see that, no, we are celebrating the memory of this person, that he died for a noble cause, and that this is hardening the resolve of everybody in Iran. And that's what you're doing again and again. You kill their leaders, you kill their civilians. You're just hardening the Iranians, and like not just the Iranians. Remember, this is the Shia leader. We have over 300 million Shias, and just the world in general. We see what Israel and the U.S. is doing. It's just hardening the resolve of definitely the Iranians and the Shias, but also us around the world. I mean, I just saw Israel just take a huge residential building down in Beirut, and scores of families were in there that just got wiped out. Like, this is. My tax dollars have paid for that bomb. Like we are all attached to it. It's disgusting.
Yeah. Right. It should not be forgotten. Our focus naturally is on Iran, but the death toll in Lebanon has been very high, and in per capita terms, much higher than in Iran. And they have, over the last couple of weeks, the Israelis have killed many, I think we're above 700 now, 700 Lebanese. And often, they'll claim that somehow that they're all Hezbollah, but we know they're families. I'm getting the reports, and you see the faces, and, it's really hard to bear.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, it's, martyrdom is very much celebrated, in particularly in Shia Islam. That's true. And that gives the Iranians, I think, kind of an extra resilience.
So I think they're more dedicated to defeating Israel and the United States more than ever now. And every single time we do one of these incidents where we take out decapitation strike, take out one of their leaders, or kill a score of civilians, that's all you're doing. You're just seeding the destruction. You're just hardening these people against you so that you will never be able to defeat them. That's how I feel what's going on, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
right. Well, again, you could see it with the that takes concrete form in the case of the succession, of the supreme leader. When the Khamenei Sr. was assassinated, actually, he had left instructions. He had named 3 successors, and his son was not among them. And he had specifically said earlier, I don't want my son to succeed me because I don't want this to be, in the family. It's not going to be a hereditary position. I don't want that to happen. So that was, and I think if he had died peacefully, his instructions would have been followed. But because this was wartime, the it was the council of experts that selected a successor. They felt that they needed somebody who was particularly tough, particularly, uncompromising, and that's why they chose his son. So that's. But again, that may be the Israelis in a way are fine with that. They want to they're not interested in negotiations. The Americans pretend to be, which is just crazy. I don't know why anybody would, least of all the Iranians would want to negotiate with the Americans. But in Donald Trump's confused minds, he thinks at some point he'll bring him to the negotiating table. He'll say, yeah, forget that.
Yeah, we killed his dad. We killed his wife. We killed his kids.
His mother,
his niece,
yeah, right.
My goodness,
it's really, every once in a while I stop and think, if that happened to me, what? I don't even know how anybody can bear something like that. I just would be so, hey, yeah, this is the person you're going to deal with.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Is he going to trust you with anything? This happened again during negotiations. I think we should also point out that there's more information that's come about the negotiations. It was the foreign minister of Oman that said that there was a real breakthrough, that the Iranians at the end had made quite a surprising offer. They went much farther than they had gone before. And but that has been backed up. Actually, there was a report in, I think, The Guardian, in the UK, that that indeed, the Iranians had made this offer. But the same report said, and this actually came from a British diplomat, that was aware of what was going on there in the negotiations. He said that he described essentially Kushner and Witkoff as both incompetent, inept, I think was the word that was used, and guilty of sabotage. That they clearly described them as Israeli intelligence assets. That's how it was described in The Guardian, those two guys. And I think that's basically right. So it wasn't, Trump was actually not getting honest, objective reports, from these two guys, which is not surprising. Now, it's because they were, as we knew, they were Israel firsters, they're Zionist zealots, both of them. And also they're incompetent. They don't understand these are highly technical issues. And that was something in the New York Times. There's also, a report that came out about them and about this negotiations. They actually misunderstood things that the Iranians were telling them. And, to misinterpreted them as somehow as threats or very alarming or whatever. But there were real offers to reduce the program, to keep it, under very careful control, with third-party observers, IAEA, and, but these are all technical things, but there weren't any technical people in the team. That was something the Iranians themselves were scratching their heads trying to understand. So anyway, this is just a story of it's incompetence, but it's also sabotage. I hear these, they're very learned discussions about how at some point they'll come to the table and there'll be any negotiations and the Iranians will demand this. I don't know that that's even possible. How can if the Iranians are going to demand security guarantees or a lifting of the sanctions, is any of that going to happen? It's not going to happen. I mean, it's just like what I should say is actually, are the Americans can they be trusted to actually carry through on any of those things? And I think the answer is no. And it would be incredible, for the Iranians to really trust them to do that. So you have, because of the utter incompetence and treachery of the Americans, they're just, you don't see any kind of, let's say a diplomatic off-ramp to this.
Right. Yeah, no diplomatic off-ramp, and then that means that this will mean a military defeat for the United States, a very obvious one, with us being booted out of the region. All of these assets that we have, they're gone, and I don't know if that's something that we can stomach. I don't know how that will go down.
Yeah, that's the thing. Now, I think one possibility that how this might end is actually with the Chinese moving in to a great extent. It's just these Gulf states, I think they clearly are angry at the U.S. They're angry at Iran too. They've always been suspicious of Iran, and that's why they're in this alliance and they let the Americans, attack them. But they always believed that somehow the Americans could protect them, right? They pretended to be neutral when they weren't. And you could say the Iranians, essentially exposed them for what they were. But now they're in a real fix. They're in serious trouble. All of them. They're suffering blows that they may never recover from. And this was not what was supposed to happen under the security arrangement that they had with the U.S. This deal. Okay, again, we give up part of our sovereignty. You have this base here. You protect us. As the U.S. did not keep it. It's part of the bargain. So even if, like, the U.S. somehow manages to win this war and open the Strait of Hormuz, which is going to be, well, it would be so costly that I don't think they really can do it. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that they do. It's just like they've already suffered a huge hit. And I think I find it hard to see, like, those Gulf states and the U.S. simply bowing to Iranian demands. I think that's going to be very, very hard for them to do. They're going to be very suspicious and afraid of Iran, and I think you need another great power to move in. And I think that great power is going to be China. And China, again, has good relations with Iran, and Iran would allow them to move in there and to be, begin to replace the Americans. I don't think that it's going to happen immediately, but there will be a big step in that direction, and I think that's going to be the eventual reality, or quite possibly. I think that's a realistic future, and that may be, this war may eventually end with China, moving into the region and beginning to replace the U.S. there.
Just the amount of self-sabotage the U.S. does, it's insane. When you say that China would move in and replace the U.S., we're not talking about replacing them militarily, because I don't think China has any desire to build military bases around the world. I think their idea of securing the region is just through economic ties, right? That this will bring stability, is that we work together here, and that there isn't going to be any sort of these military bases around. Is that the idea? Or
well, I'm not sure. I think they may be reluctant, but they may provide in some way some sort of security guarantee. I think we could see that happening. I don't think that they would, like, take over all the bases there or anything. Maybe they will have one base. They do, but they would have a smaller military footprint. That would be my guess, based on past Chinese behavior.
Yeah, the Gulf states have to be suffering terribly right now, and as this goes on, I think that the pressure is really going to build on them to do something drastic, that they'd say, like, we're going to have to cut the U.S. out. They brought this to us, and they have no ability to fix this problem that they started. So we're going to have to say, sorry, we have to, tie our sled to Iran and China. That these are the ones that are going to. Iran's not leaving the region. It is the region, right? So, and China is not going to be slowing down either. So I think they're going to have to come to that conclusion. And the quicker that one of them does come to that conclusion, starts to do it, then the dam breaks. I think all of them move, because I think they all they all understand. I think they're just all a little afraid, and they have these ties with the U.S. that are just a little bit difficult to sever. But they're going to have to. Right.
Yeah, and it's certainly possible. And already there has been criticism. I mentioned the attack on that gas field, South Pars gas field in western Iran. Actually, that's a gas field that is jointly exploited by both Iran and Qatar. And so when that gas field was attacked, the Qataris were quite angry, and they openly criticized Israel and the U.S. about that. So that's a sign, again. And the Iranians made clear that, okay, if you start going after our oil and gas infrastructure, we are going to start pounding, these refineries. They have made isolated strikes on them. Usually in response to certain strikes that Israel and the U.S. has made on Iran, but they haven't gone after them in a big way. But they could really do very significant damage. They could destroy some of these facilities. So if we're looking at the possibility of $150 to $200 or a barrel for oil, it could go a lot higher. So that's the danger, if Israel keeps on hitting these facilities, and then Iran is promised to retaliate, and we could be in for, a pretty wild ride. Another danger, I've talked about, obviously these Gulf states are in a very bad position. They're probably being pressured to move openly against Iran, to join the fight. They do have militaries. They're not very big, but they do have them. And I can't say they wouldn't do that. I don't know what goes on in their heads. They're, though they seem to me to be, the kind of people that always want other people to fight their wars. So that could happen, but that would, again, have disastrous consequences. That would be immediately, that it would mean that the Iranians would just pull out all stops and start going after all of their gas and oil infrastructure. So, we're right on the edge of a precipice here. Let's put it that way.
Mm. And the other thing that's just cracking right now is just here on the domestic front. We have that Joe Kent leaving. How significant is that? He wrote this letter saying that Iran poses no threat to us, and that basically Israel pushed us into this war. He put the blame at Israel.
Yeah.
And
yeah, no, I think it's quite significant. It did get a good amount of play in the press. It elicited a condemnation and ridicule, of course, from Trump. That's how he responds to these things always, of course. Joe Kent is going to appear on Tucker Carlson's show, I think, sometime today, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. So I think here domestically the dam is broken. This is somebody that was a MAGA guy that lost his wife in Iraq, I believe. He lost buddies. He understands what's going on, and having someone like that leave and pen a letter so openly like that, I think it's a huge blow to this war effort and. The military in general. We also have the reports of the USS Gerald R that they set fire in themselves. Is the theory that it was actually they set fire to it,
right.
And 600 beds have been burned, and so they're sleeping on tables and cots and they're
right on the floor is what I've heard.
Right.
It was the USS Gerald R. Ford was, for some reason, just hanging out in the Red Sea, when this happened. They had the earlier problem with the sewage, to be polite about it. But, and there was suspicion of sabotage at that time because a mop head and a sweatshirt or whatever had been discovered in the pipes too. And then this laundry room fire occurred. Now it's the USS Gerald R. Ford is steaming back to Crete. For repairs and but also for an investigation, according to a Greek newspaper. They said there is suspicion of sabotage, and that's going to be looked into. I also heard it was the I forget the name of it. It's another carrier that's right off the. I think maybe it's not even completely seaworthy yet. It's still being, the finishing touches are being put on it. It's at Norfolk, Virginia, and they're taking 1,000 mattresses from that carrier, and flying them over to Crete, and also apparently 2,000 sweatshirts because the laundry's not being done, or sweatsuits or something too. So yeah, it's a mess, and it does suggest that there may be, this is very unusual. I can't recall, and apparently, it's hard to remember the last time that something like this happened during wartime, if indeed this was sabotage. They essentially mutiny,
Right. People don't want this war. And the longer it goes on, the more and more pressure is going to build here domestically as well. People are upset. And we talked about this before, though. We'll start looking for a scapegoat, and the scapegoat is obvious. It's Israel. Israel wants this war. Israel, by getting us into this war, Israel is effectively destroying not just the United States, but really the whole global economy here. And they have no disregard, and they're turning the whole world against the United States as well. And I think regular everyday Americans are starting to recognize that, or they just see the gas prices. Like I just drove by today and I saw the gas is up over $1.20 now since the start of the war at my local gas station.
Yeah.
It's significant. And when I filled up, I'm like, man, it's over $50 now to fill up my, my little Honda Accord. It's, you notice it. People will feel the pain when people are feeling the pain. And so I just think Trump has this massive problem on his hand. I think more and more people are going to start to abandon ship because they have to, because there's no solution here. What do we do? We just keep on blowing up civilians and then getting our boys killed. Like there's no way out. And nobody's explaining like what victory is now. Like, we reopen the Strait of Hormuz. How do we keep it open, even if we did do it? Do we have to stay there forever? Is it regime change? What we don't know.
Unconditional surrender.
Unconditional surrender. Yeah, right. What are we talking about here? There's no plan. Trump is just, he's so lost. He doesn't know what he's doing at all. He's just
he's in serious trouble, and you can see the depth of the crisis again from the responses from his so-called allies, when he asked them to come and join this endeavor, to open the Strait of Hormuz, actually asked them to do it, and we'll help you. We'll help you a lot, that we're not going in there, but you do it. Every one of them said no. Now, I heard that Keir Starmer is kind of waffling on that now, but everybody else is a definite no, which is extraordinary. It's just something we haven't seen in the past. They've often, the Europeans in particular, and the Japanese and the South Koreans, they're all the same. They're scared to death of offending the U.S. and they never, when they say no, they try to sugarcoat their words and use very diplomatic language, but these were just outright no's. We don't do that. We're not doing it. And it just shows that, they're looking at it and say, this is a huge, huge mess and we don't want to be a part of it. How does he get out of it? There's, at the start there was all these declarations of victory, and I had a little bit of hope that, he'll declare victory. He killed the supreme leader. Say that this was save the world, and he was saying things like that. Iran was about to take over the Middle East and was going to threaten the whole globe and all this nonsense. And you just saved the world. Great, turn around and get out of there, declare victory. But now he just seems to be doubling down. I heard that when he got those negative responses from his various allies, according to Lindsey Graham, he was furious. He said, that Lindsey Graham said, I've never seen him so furious, or which is just shows that how little of a grip on reality he has. Of course they were going to say no. It just shows he just doesn't even know what's going on. And he's scared, but he can never show the fact that he's scared. I think his way of dealing with fear is to, just lash out. And that's what he's doing, just lashing out in every direction. And the danger is that he may just, again, double down and try to send in troops and, seize Karg Island or, make a landing somewhere on the Hormuz Strait. And that just would be so disastrous.
I don't know if I don't think we can do that, right? I mean, we can't make a landing. They'll blow our ships up before they get too close, right?
I think so, but he just might attempt it. I think he would get some really serious pushback. He already has received somebody's, he's been advised against doing, against this war, but he did it anyway. Again, he's the commander-in-chief. He can just decide that, and he's got these yes men around him, say, you just got to do it. You're going to be you're Winston Churchill. You're the greatest man in history. You have to double down. You can't, if you pull out now, you're just going to be a loser. So you can't do it. But I think that we might see some real, like resignations or something if he really tries to push that. He might eventually get, some sycophants who will just do whatever he asks them to do. But any generals with just a shred of integrity and intelligence will say no.
Yeah, we're becoming so isolated now, the United States. Even our allies are saying no, turning around. These Gulf states, the Eastern Asian countries, South Korea, Japan, they're all very upset. And I think everybody is kind of done with this relationship with the United States. You just see how horrific it's been. And even here domestically, though, he's being isolated. Americans don't want this war. It's really just becoming kind of now regular Americans versus the Zionists. And there's no compromise now between these two parties, because I think as this continues, more and more regular Americans are viewing the Zionists as an enemy, saying like, whoa, where are your interests? You're not doing this for my country. You're doing it for Israel. This is all you care about. You're dragging us into here for whether it's some apocalyptic Christian Zionist view you have, or if you're just a, Israel first or whatever it is. People in America, the majority, are going to start viewing these people as the enemy. And I don't know what the makeup is, but let's just say like 80% regular Americans, 20% Zionists. Like, where does it go as this divide becomes larger and larger? And before, we used to just not even really talk about Zionism, so nobody cared. It wasn't an issue. But this has become this division where it's like, okay, the majority of Americans are viewing this minority population that has control of so many of our institutions as the enemy. What happens?
Yeah. Eventually that's going to bring about a real change in the establishment. I think there's no question about it. I was just listening to, I think it was John Mearsheimer yesterday. It was, who was he talking to? Maybe, I can't remember. Yeah, it may have been Judge Napolitano, who I believe it was. Yeah, who brought up the fact that this was the 20th anniversary of his book, The Israel Lobby. And he just asked for comments from Professor Mearsheimer, and Professor Mearsheimer said that, that he couldn't even foresee how much things would change and in terms of attitudes towards Israel within this country in those 20 years. When he did that, that was a very brave act. Actually, you read it now, it just seems very moderately toned, and it is. He's not a firebrand at all. He's a careful, soft-spoken person. That was the book that he wrote with Stephen Waltz of Harvard. But it was a very, very brave move there, and that he and Stephen Waltz were subjected to all kinds of attacks, and they're accused of being anti-Semites and all that. Because they were professors at elite colleges, they survived the attacks. But he says now it's just so different. I mean, it's just like this. These things were not part of the, let's say, national conversation. And they published that book, and it attracted some attention, but it was just nothing but condemnation within the mainstream press. Now you start seeing, even in the mainstream press, people talking about this problem. And there has been a huge, huge shift, especially on the Democratic side of the ledger, but increasingly so on the Republican side. And he said he felt like Tucker Carlson was the future of the Republican Party. And I think he's probably right. I think he's right. So anyway, I was just looking at a poll yesterday. It shows, this very dramatic shift against Israel, continues. If anything, it's accelerating. So now you have let's see.
I hope it's accelerating. Look at the Iran war. Look at gas prices. Americans are going to care, and they're going. That's what I'm saying. Is like Americans,
right?
Like they usually don't care about foreign policy, whatever, Middle East wars, and we've been doing that. But then all of a sudden, they start seeing their gas prices going up, everything else go up, and they start paying a little bit more attention. Like, wait a second, and they understand. It's just so obvious. There's so many things that have happened over the past couple of years that have been like. Right. We're doing this for Israel. The discourse is just there. We've been talking, everybody's been talking about it for years. This Gaza genocide's been going on for years. Everybody has seen these things. You can't hide from it anymore.
Right. So, this poll that I was just referenced or mentioned was actually taken before the start of the war, right before the start of the war. So if anything, it's going to show an even sharper shift against Israel. But for the 18 to 34s, there's only 13% that actually have a positive view of Israel. 63% have a negative view. And that's way down. There was the number of people with a positive view in that age group was 26%. back in 2023. So just, prior to the start of the attack on Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. So that it was already low. They already had that shift against Israel had begun even before Gaza, actually in quite a notable way, but it really accelerated. So we went from 26 to 13. So, it was already low and it halved in just 3 years. And it's probably worse. The only age group where there is still solid support for Israel is in the 65 and olders. But even there, it's declining and negative views are increasing. So it does look really, really bad for Israel. I mean, it does. Now, you just can't, you still have this establishment, of course, very, very much in Israel's pocket, or, I don't want to say that it's all just a matter of, buying them off. And I think clearly in some cases it is. You have, AIPAC's influence. In many cases, a lot of these people like Mike Huckabee, they really believe, that they need to be Zionists. I think they're sincere about that. But they are increasingly at odds with the electorate. And I think over time that's going to change things, even at the pinnacle of power. We'll see.
Do you think it's possible that Israel will cry uncle and try to stop this themselves? They're like, we can't do this anymore. But even if they did cry uncle, the question is, Iran won't stop, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, I think a big part of it is they are running out of munitions. I was just reading that in the first 4 days, the U.S. and Israel burned through a third of some of their critical stockpiles. We're talking about missiles mainly. And so they got to be coming to the end. This is something that, I like Ted Postel and others who said that by the end of 2 weeks, you should see a change. And now, I don't know if there is. It's kind of hard to get a sense of how much, but I think we're at that critical threshold, if we haven't passed it already, where the tempo is just going to have to drop on the Israeli and the U.S. side. And then you have the whole air defense question. Again, it's I don't know how effective this air defense is, but anyway, the Israeli side believes that it's worth something, and those stockpiles are, if the reports are true, are critically low too. So they're going to be in a position where, they're increasingly vulnerable and increasingly unable to wreak the destruction that they have been wreaking on Iran. And at some point, it hasn't happened yet, but there are murmurings of, dissatisfaction with these wars. In general, the Israelis, again, that's what the polls show, and it's been historically true. They completely back the IDF in their wars, and they're doing that now. But this war is taking a toll, and if it doesn't turn out well, and it starts to drag on, and you may see the beginnings of a real anti-war movement, maybe even in Israel. No signs of it yet. But look, they're really fighting two wars. Gaza, they're killing people in Gaza. I think they killed 6 yesterday, and the misery continues. But they're launching a real war in Lebanon. They're talking about calling up 45,000 reservists. And again, Israel is not a big country. That's a lot of people. And these reservists have been doing duty in Gaza for over 2 years, or many of them have, or probably all of them have done at least some. And people are spending hours in these air raid shelters day after day. They can't fly out of the country. It's something. This is not already. It's not a 12-day war. If it turns into a 2-month war or something, we could see both in the U.S. and Israel. But especially in the U.S. because the support was never there for this war in any meaningful way. You could see some building domestic pressure, against the governments. Israel, of course, has a way to go. They're over 90% support, but maybe that will begin to decline. I think they will over time.
I don't know if we can trust these numbers as well, But where's this? And if it is true, 90%, where does that sense of optimism come from? I mean, they wanted this war. This is a war that they wanted and they got, and they were aware of Israel's capabilities Iran's capabilities from the 12-Day War.
Yeah.
And now they're in this situation now. This is the war you ordered, Israel. You got it. And now maybe they're not liking it so much. Like, or they're still optimistic. What do they see? How do they see victory being achieved at this point? Like, how are they still pro this war?
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably not quite accurate to say that Israel wanted the war. Now that they're in the war, there is this widespread support for it. There's just this tendency to always back the IDF in Israel. But it was really Netanyahu and his people that wanted this war. And Netanyahu, you have to say it's always can be personal. I mean, we've always pointed out. I mean, he wants to create a legacy. Again, he wants to be this great hero of Israel. But then he's also got his very personal short-term interests. Those are very much in play. The polls were showing that his coalition would be ousted from power, and if he's ousted in power, then it becomes impossible to delay these. The court hearings that could lead to a corruption trial, that could lead to his imprisonment. So I think it was, above all, it was Netanyahu. And again, that's, what we've heard. It was Netanyahu constantly applying pressure to Trump and convincing him that it was going to be easy. And I'm sure that he knew that there were real risks, but he decided that they were worth taking. And they can, the Israelis, they don't care. See, one of the things is they don't care about the Strait of Hormuz. Obviously, the U.S. does. Again, that whole oil infrastructure, that's what. Okay, the Israelis just don't give a damn about it. But obviously, Trump and his people are very, very sensitive about it. So they may think that we can just pull out of this, and even if the Strait of Hormuz is still shut, that's America's problem.
Yeah. Well, speaking about Netanyahu, do you think he's dead?
I don't know. I just don't know.
He's got to be. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You see these videos, these videos saying,
I haven't seen them.
I'm alive. I've got 5 fingers. Like, who makes these videos? It's strange talking to Mike Huckabee and like there's something off with them. And then, like a ring disappearing in it. It seems clearly there's something not right here. And you don't need to make these videos. It's just like him going on TV afterwards and saying like, I had nothing to do with killing Charlie Kirk. It's like, what an odd thing to say. It's like, look, I'm actually alive and I have 5 fingers. That's an odd thing to say. If you're alive, you don't make these types of weird little SNL skits. You just go on living and people notice. You're just a present.
You go out in public.
You go out in public, or you're attending meetings with your military officials, so to show that you are still here, command front. Nobody's questioning whether or not Donald Trump's alive or not. He's there talking constantly. He's just being Donald Trump. He's just clearly living. Netanyahu does not seem to be.
Yeah. No, I think I doubt that he's actually dead yet. Maybe just because I haven't seen the rumors in the Israeli press. But maybe there's military censorship. So even if the Israeli journalists are wondering about it, they're probably not allowed to write about it. So,
of course.
Yes, that's a good point. But at the very least, so if he's not dead, he's hiding. I think he could actually be very scared. He's knocking off their leaders, and he understands that, well, they may try to retaliate and come after me. And he's probably hiding in a bunker somewhere. Now that the radars have been knocked out in those Persian Gulf bases, Israel's only getting like a minute warning. It used to be that it had at least 10 minutes. Okay, Mr. President or Mr. Prime Minister, we'll get you down into your air raid shelter just to make absolutely sure. He can't do that anymore. Just might not have time to run. So he's probably hiding somewhere if he is alive.
Yeah, but I mean, even if he's hiding, I think they could do something to put these rumors to rest. Everything they've tried to do to put these rumors to rest is just kind of solidified people's opinions. Like, I guess he's dead, because this is really weird what they're saying, and these videos we're seeing are very strange. And let's say if we find out they continue this charade for 2 more weeks or whatever, and we go a month later, and then we was like, he's been dead for a month. What does that do to people's just like perception of Israel or the morale?
Yeah, right. Um,
I just want to say one
yeah,
more
well,
thing.
I think certainly within Israel, it would be a real blow because they've worked hard to establish, to cultivate this aura of invincibility. And I think that's what the military censorship in great part is about, that, to maintain that sense of invulnerability. And if Iran indeed succeeded in assassinating their prime minister, that would, that would greatly diminish, or put an end to that aura of invulnerability. They are vulnerable. That's something that Israel just does. It was because I think above all, that was that explains the genocide. It was this attack on October 7th. It exposed it made the Israelis for the first time appear vulnerable, and that had to be erased. And they did it through this total destruction of Gaza.
Yeah.
So they are extremely sensitive to that. And it could be, if in fact he was, I have no idea. I'll just say, if in fact he was assassinated, yeah, it is believable that they may be trying to hide it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, with the October 7th, I'm of the belief that that was something that Netanyahu wanted, that there was that stand down order. Even Charlie Kirk was saying that. This guy Netanyahu is just, I mean, look, these videos, even when he's dead in these videos, he's still lying. He's lying even after he's been killed. I'm alive.
Yeah.
Nice try, Ned. I don't think so. It's insane. I don't get it. But I do think that, we talked about how when Larijani was killed or Khamenei is killed, the effect that has on Iranian society. I think it strengthens their resolve. And I think the reason they're hiding Netanyahu or something fishy gone here is it has the opposite effect. They don't have that sense of martyrdom. In many ways, Iran has a much more powerful, structure, a system of institutions that are built around it. It's an ancient civilizational state. It doesn't just disappear. Israel is not. This is a colonial project that's not even, how old is it now? So, not even 80 years old, whatever. And it's, it can't do this. It loses someone like Netanyahu, then you do have a power vacuum. You do have chaos. These people aren't really married to this land, the soil. I think that you are going to have more and more panic, people trying to leave. It's just the whole, you take out Netanyahu, I think it's a huge, huge blow for the Zionist project that it may not be able to recover from.
Yeah. Well,
that's why they're hiding it.
Yeah. Well, I think it does have to be pointed out. They do have strong institutions. I think their political system is going to be resilient up to a point. Now, there has been increasing polarization, kind of similar to what's happening in this country, where the institutions that were seem so solid are now really coming into attack, and the different factions are fighting over them. So it is more fragile than it once was. But I think the loss of Netanyahu wouldn't, cause Israel. It's not, again, it's not like Saddam Hussein's Iraq. I think in the end, it wouldn't even change their adherence to Zionism. I'm sure it wouldn't. It wasn't because of Netanyahu that Israel is Zionist. Israel is Zionist, and it is across the spectrum. That's just a fact. And in fact, in the case of this war, the only kind of criticism that Netanyahu has been receiving has been from the hawkish side. There's a potential opponent who's supposed to be somewhat to his left or whatever, but he's criticizing Netanyahu, whether he's alive or dead, for not hitting Iran hard enough. So if he goes, I think that Israel will, the government will hold together, and it'll probably pursue the same policies.
I don't know. Maybe
yeah,
not.
Maybe, but there is that personal factor, again, that we've talked about, that part of the reason that this war may have happened was Netanyahu was looking at his short-term political interests. And if you take him out of the equation, it may be a little bit easier for Israel to pull out of it, just because you don't have Netanyahu and, trying to keep out of jail anymore.
Right. Yeah, this war is just, the most poorly thought out thing
Yeah,
that I have
that's
ever
sure.
seen. It's just insane. I mean, just with the Strait of Hormuz, just every country in the world now is involved because of this, because of what you've done. You have, wrecked the global economy, and everybody's going to be looking at Trump and saying, "Why the hell did you do this, man?" And
Yeah,
everybody's going to turn on us, and we don't
yeah,
have an answer. And our best answer is, "Oh well, Israel was about to do it, so we felt like we had to join
yeah,
them."
right.
That's our response. That's what Marco Rubio
Or
says.
Iran is evil and was about to take over the world. If you listen to Donald Trump now, and we
Yeah,
just saved the world. Um, yeah, no, it's the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is. We've talked about the effects in this country. Every time you go to the gas station, you can see them, but they're more severe to the east of the Strait of Hormuz. In other words, among the Asian countries, India, Japan, South Korea, and they're actually beginning rationing already in those countries because they fear that, again, it's clear that they see that this could go on for a long time. India is particularly vulnerable. They are getting some shipments of oil. I know that the Iranians are, but if the U.S. actually bombs Karg Island in a serious way or whatever, that could end. India is going to, and that would be a consequence of that bombing. Let's remember that. And India would be in severe trouble immediately. Now, they'll go to Russia in a big way, but Russia can only supply so much oil, and I'm sure Russia is going to be supplying lots of oil to China, even more than they have. I wouldn't be surprised if Japan starts to negotiate with Russia for some of their oil as well. We're going to see all those things happening. This is moving pretty fast.
right. I mean, like I said, just 19 days in now, and yeah, it's out of control. Let's just say though, if Trump just keeps on doubling down and he does start attacking like the Karg Island, the refinery itself, so no more oil can be shipped out of there. They hit more gas fields. Iran retaliates. They set the whole region ablaze. I mean, we're already seeing this massive shock to energy prices. Then I imagine if this happens, it's going to be devastating. And we talk about also just other things like urea, aluminum, helium, things that are necessary
Ammonia,
for
right.
ammonia for agriculture.
Right.
I think we will start, massive food shortages around the world. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about, I don't know if there's anything that we've seen like this in history before where we have something like this, where because the whole world is so connected now and we need energy, and then you just destroy a huge portion of the world's supply of energy and our ability to produce food. I mean, are we talking about like potentially a global depression, and what does that mean? Is it like what I think of when I hear depression, which is people are here in the United States are starving and having to pack up their stuff and move out west to try to find more opportunities, massive migrations. Like, what do you think is is in store if that happens?
Yeah, we're a ways from that now. The U.S. actually is better off than most countries in the world. I mean, Russia is probably benefiting more than any country because of this, right? But the U.S. is self-sufficient in energy. Now, people might wonder, well, why are gas prices going up? It's because we have for-profit petroleum companies. And, as the demand for oil increases overseas and the price, that those overseas buyers are willing to pay, it goes up. Well, they start selling, they'll start selling to them, and the price, to keep it in the U.S. goes up. That's how it works. So that's why we see it going up here, even though we are energy self-sufficient. But so it will go up. It'll go up, probably go up to a very high level, but it won't be as bad as in some places that don't have any sort of energy self-sufficiency. Particularly the Asian countries that we talked about in Europe. These are the countries that are in serious, serious trouble. And then when it comes to we do have more than enough agriculture to feed ourselves, but we are dependent in part on fertilizers coming from the Persian Gulf, a significant portion, and that's going to affect prices. We're not going to starve, but it's going to be rough, right? If this goes on for a long, it's going to be very rough. I just don't think we have a stomach for it. So that may be the thing that saves it. But the thing is, I don't know that it'll save us, but that will cause Trump to it'll force a decision on him to pull out. It would have been easier, of course, if he never did this. It would have been easier if he pulled out immediately after, the start of the war and said mission accomplished. Now it's going to be more difficult. But if the pressure becomes too great, he may think, oh my God, I just got to pull out. But he, at the same time, he said, but it's going to be so obvious that I lost this. It's just like, again, it's the logic. We've talked about that with Ukraine. It's just this terrible logic of war. The farther you go down, it becomes, you have that sunk cost fallacy. You say, I've already lost so much. I can't just back out of it now. I'll just I'm admitting that I made a mistake. So I just double down and somehow hope to come out on the other side. And there's a real chance that he might do that, with very reckless actions like, attempted landings on Karg or on the Iranian coast or something like that, or some sort of special operation to seize the enriched uranium, Isfahan, or, which all of these would be extremely dangerous and I think would be almost certainly would fail. So I think that's what we're going to see. It may come sooner rather than later because the pressures are building pretty rapidly.
Yeah, we've always talked about the empire, U.S. empire is collapsing, and I think this move here with the Iran war is really the nail in the coffin. There is no turning back now. This has sealed the fate for the American empire. But in that sense, then, are you glad that this is happening?
I can't say I'm glad. I'm anxious. It's this because first of all, there are people that are really suffering. The people in Lebanon, the people in Iran, and they will suffer more. And so, I can't ever say that I'm glad that this is happening. I'm not glad for the American military personnel that are killed too. I don't think they should be there, but a lot of them, they just trusted their government and thought that the government knew what their commanders knew what they were doing and to send them to these bases. And now we're killed. We don't know how many have been killed. So I'm not glad, that's a potential. I guess I've always said this. It's just that I think this, the multipolar world is an inevitability. But it's going to get there, we're going to have to go through some really dark and scary places. And that's what we're doing now. I can't say I'm glad, but I do have that hope that on the other side, that we will get through this and we will have taken a real step towards multipolarity and the end of American-led Western hegemony.
Yeah, I guess I'm glad that the U.S. is a lot weaker than the people that are in charge realized. And in that sense, I feel a little bit safer. I'm wondering if we try to do this, for example, 20 years ago, perhaps it would broil out into a huge war. The drone technology wasn't there. We could do something with landing troops and actually start building some type of, beachhead or something like this. Who knows? The missile arsenal wasn't large enough. And then this could lead into a really huge catastrophic war. But where we are now, it just doesn't seem like we have the ability to even engage in a protracted war. We've talked about munition shortages and everything. And so in that sense, it's like, this is horrific. And then the only really scary thing is the non-conventional choice, the nuclear weapons, if that happens, that's always was going to be a possibility. And I think it probably would have been more likely if there was sort of a long, drawn-out war of attrition that we're fighting that would potentially happen. But here with this war, everything is happening so rapidly. The U.S. is running out of munition so quickly. We ran out of options immediately. Strait of Hormuz is closed immediately. Global economy is tanking. The whole thing is just going up in flames so quick that it makes me feel that, maybe that's for the best, that this is such a horrible miscalculation that this is just going to end the empire much more quickly and it can't expand into World War III. Maybe I'm being naive, but.
Yeah. Well, let's hope you're right. Sometimes for me, the worst outcome would be that somehow the Israelis and the U.S. succeed. They break apart Iran. Iran is just worn down. They just suffer. I don't think that's going to happen. But in my weaker moments, sometimes I really do worry about it because I've seen what's happened to Syria. I've seen what's happened to these other countries.
I think you
But
just
again,
have
like
more.
we've always said, Iran is different. It's very, very different. And there's no sign that that's happening. And I strongly doubt that it will. But that would
Yeah,
be a terrible thing. It's just that they actually get away with it. And again, they say, well, I guess you just can't beat the U.S. All these countries will come to that conclusion or something. So let's hope that doesn't happen.
yeah.
But let's
I
also
think
hope that it doesn't, we don't end up with a nuclear war or
right.
nuclear attacks on Iran.
I think you have those thoughts that, maybe there's a chance that the U.S. and Israel will succeed because you're older and you remember when the U.S. was more competent and more powerful. For me, it doesn't even enter my mind. It's just because my whole adult life, I've just seen absolute incompetence. I haven't seen any strength or wise decision making, from the United
Right.
States
Yeah.
my whole life,
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's just like I have zero faith in our government and our institutions to do things efficiently or correctly or morally, anything. So it just,
yeah.
I
Right.
would never bet on the United States.
Yeah, that may be true. I do remember past wars like the Persian Gulf War under Bush Senior, and then the Iraq War. And in both cases, there were analysts that said, "Oh, this could end badly for the U.S." As kind of, there was reasons to worry, but when the war started, it was just clear that we had overwhelming firepower, and I think that's probably Trump also lives in that, the past in that sense. We always win these wars, and there are always those naysayers, those doubters. And then Yahoo and others went to work with him. Lindsey Graham, apparently he was a very big part of this team that convinced Trump that this was a good thing, a smart thing to do. But yeah, it sure looks like, we live in a different age now, and that the unipolar moment is clearly over. We can't. You could see it. Probably it was on display in a way. We've seen it. I think it was over already, and then the Russia war, the Ukraine war was exposing that already. But we've never seen it more on display than when the U.S. asked for help and they all said no. I think that is a moment that we can look back to as, oh yeah, that's when it was clear that the ship was going down.
Right. Okay, Dad, let's end it there then.
All right.
All right. Have a good rest of your day.
Okay. You too.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.